Right. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another episode of hashtag What's Next here on Open Dialogus. First of all, thank you very much for joining us on the stream. And can I also invite you, please, if you do enjoy the conversations that we have, please make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel and similarly on Facebook and Twitter, and also on the Open Dialogus website. There's lots of places where you can find us, and if you can share this material, that's great, so we get the content out to as many people as possible. And I can see you joining. I see familiar people joining. But anyway, thanks very much for being part of this. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to bring on the stream my two guests. I'll introduce them in no particular order. First of all, Bill Etheridge. Bill's a regular feature here on Open Dialogus. Bill, as you know, is UKIP economic spokesperson, also formerly a UKIP MEP and political commentator. And Bill, you're very welcome on the stream this evening.
Thank you.
And to complete the little group tonight, we have my regular Monday night sparring partner on Old News Media, Rebecca Butler, who's a former senior sister in the NHS and a very successful barrister. And again, Rebecca, you're welcome to the stream. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, David. Hi, Bill. Nice to see you both.
So folks, so here we are, and we're not too far away from Christmas. The drumbeat of the Christmas occasion gets greater, although it appears in parts of the UK it may be cancelled. But anyway, we leave that to one side. What we want to chat about tonight is, I guess, something which is relevant 12 months a year, and that is the kind of the whole culture wars thing that's in some ways it's taken a bit of a backseat, actually, funnily enough, I think this year, because of COVID occupying the debating space for everything else. But there is quite a few things we should, I think, talk about, and it'd be really interesting to hear your take on it. And I guess for me, the starting area, it relates to Eton. And I think you're both familiar with the story. And this relates to the Eton teacher, schoolmaster. And you mean people pay a lot of money to go to Eton to hear stuff. And Will Noland was the name of the guy who made a video called the Patriarchy Paradox. A good example of alliteration. And he made this video essentially challenging some of the radical feminist ideology and stating really outrageous things, Bill, like, gosh, men and women are different from each other. And yeah, some of those differences are genetical and societal things do not necessarily make the man or make the woman. Anyway, it got him into a whole lot of bother. And we want to talk through that a little bit because there's reasons why he got into a whole lot of bother, and he lost his job. Ultimately, he was dismissed. And you know, at the heart of this, and this is what we want to broaden the conversation into is it possible in the UK in 2020 to actually discuss some things that challenge the prevailing feminist orthodoxy? So no better to have a lady like Rebecca on the stream, so that we have both genders, and I'm gender neutral in this one, by the way. So we have Bill and Rebecca. So start off with you, Rebecca. Just kicking off with so the story itself. I mean, what is your thoughts about? Was it fair that the guy got sacked? Was the video, in your view, something that was a sackable offence? And you know, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, I wish that every student in this country had the benefit of masters like Will Noland. I wish that every student had the benefit of somebody who took the trouble to research their subject, to look up the academic thought, the articles, to reference them so well, and to allow youngsters to formulate their own ideas about things and to challenge the norm. Oh my God, I wish all teachers were like that. And so I think I'll just put aside the merits of the sacking, because it is dubious, actually, why he was sacked. But I always look at questions like this and I think, well, does the punishment fit the crime if you accept the crime has happened? And in my opinion, Will Noland has not only lost his reputation, getting another job will be very difficult, he's lost his house. Now, we're just coming up to Christmas. He's a father of 5 children. I have no doubt that they are also given Eton education, or I'm guessing here, but it wouldn't be unusual that his children would be educated at Eton or educated at local linked private schools. He's lost his house, he's lost his job, and all for actually refusing to take down a video from YouTube. Now, that may well be in breach of his employment contract, but all he said was, give me a reason why I should remove my video from YouTube, and I will do it. So his request wasn't unreasonable, but you know what? They've upheld the sacking. So he's been sacked for misconduct, but look at the implications for him for not removing a video on YouTube. Wow, that is big.
Yeah. I mean, Rebecca, it's interesting. I didn't actually realize he'd lost his house. Bill, I mean, what does it come to that someone loses not just their job, but loses the roof over their head and their, and all that entails, presumably a substantial family like he has? I mean, what do you make of this issue?
Well, the repercussions that he's faced are part of the increasingly sinister clamping down on freedom and free speech going on in this country and across the Western world. But I have to say, and this may surprise both of you, but I didn't go to Eton. And I've always wondered, most of my life, what is I can see the shock. Most of my life, I spent wondering, what is it that these rather peculiar people who've gone to places like Eton, what are they taught in these places? Being a comprehensive lad from inner city Wolverhampton, I don't get the benefit of such great knowledge. And I watched this video, and frankly, my first reaction was, do they actually pay someone to state the bleeding obvious? There is nothing in this video that is even questionable or worthy of discussion. It states categorically things like, men and women are different, and then goes through the details of physiological differences and going back to nature and how we've reacted. This video isn't, in my opinion, isn't even educational. It isn't anything. It is simply a statement of fact, which frankly, to me, shouldn't even need to be stated to anyone in the school. I find it absolutely extraordinary. And the fact that it's controversial, that someone just says things that anyone in their right mind knows is factually correct. I'm baffled by the whole thing, but it does go to the rewriting of reality into this strange new normal that we're descending into, where 2 + 2 = 100, and where men and women aren't different, and we're only different if we say we're different and how we say we're different. It's absolutely bonkers.
I think for me, one of the ironies is, I think it was the Duke of Wellington who said famously that the defeat of Napoleon at Waterloo was won on the playing fields of Eton. And I just wonder, Rebecca, if the culture wars are also being won on the playing fields of Eton, but in a way that maybe not everyone fully understands yet.
Well, do you mean that Eton should be pushing back on the culture wars? Because you would expect expect a bastion of everything that signifies the upper class education, royal education. If they can't get the damn thing right, who can? One thing that, kind of backing off on what Bill said just now, one thing that really strikes me about all of the narrative in society at the moment, I really love your take on this, Bill, is that nobody disputes equality, okay? Nobody disputes the equality of opportunity. Nobody. So, of course, I should be given the same education and employment opportunities as you. That just goes without saying. But I think the woke crisis, the culture war crisis, is that people genuinely expect the outcome to be equal. But it's not, it's the input that's equal. So we aren't all born equal. Acts like the Equality Act give us the equalities in discrimination, sex, religion, so on and so forth. But that doesn't mean I end up equal to Prince William at the end of the day. I don't. And that's called life. And so I do think there is a massive difference in expectation these days. The Equality Act is going to deliver, but on a steroid turbocharged deliver, and make the whole world equal.
Yeah, I think, Bill, that is Rebecca's put her finger on it. I mean, the Equalities Act, it is like on steroids in terms of trying to provide outcomes, and you can't legislate for outcomes. You know, it's impossible. I mean, the only way you can do that is if you live in a full-on communist state. Now, I do remember the Equalities Act was, I believe, Harriet Harman, that most wonderful of Labour politicians, was a driving force behind it. And unfortunately for rad femmes like Harriet Harman, ironically, of all names she's got, actually, men very much the target as this. And Rebecca, we'll come back to you in a second on the law of this one. But this chap at Eton, this master, was ultimately in the crosshairs of the Equality Act, and in terms of what that could have meant to his school. So haven't we got a fundamental issue that we have an Orwellian Equality Act that essentially legislates against equality?
Well, truth and reality are always the first victims of communism. And let's be absolutely straight about this. We are not all equal. You know, and no matter, you can pass as many acts of legislation as you like, we are not all equal. You know, no. I like to do a bit of boxing. I got in there and had my head punched and been virtually beaten to a pulp. I'm not a very good boxer, even though I want to be. And I can train as hard as I like. I'm not very good at it. I played cricket against people who wanted to play test cricket. They absolutely slaughtered me. We are not equal. They're far better than me. And you have to accept that. Now, there might be some things that I could do better than them. You know, and certainly in the cricket game, I'd beat them in the bar afterwards. I could drink more beer than them. But, you know, the point is very straightforward. You cannot, through artificial constructs, through politics, through governmental intervention, change the world and laws of nature. We are all individuals. We are all blessed with some talent or other, which we can then build on through our own endeavours. But you cannot make us equal because we aren't. And thank God for that.
No, well, you're right.
You know, Ozzy on the stream has actually pinpointed the issue here, because I think Will Noland wanted to have a discussion about where working class white boys sit in society, and how better to choose your timing for that critical, bearing in mind this was a critical thinking course he was teaching, that if you believe evidence-based research, evidence-based policy, the government would point towards white working class boys and say they have the worst outcomes. So you expect academics like Will Noland to come out and say, right, boys, let's have a chat about that. Has sexism affected the outcome for white working class boys? Has racism affected the outcome for white working class boys? Let's have a discussion about it, because you remember the premise at Eton is that 80% of them are going to end up in senior civil service positions, like it or not. So he's molding the thoughts of the policymakers of the future to think, well, can we have a little bit more of an evidence-based thinking about the decisions you make? And you know, one person complains about it, and, you know, hell freezes over. It's the same with the Miller case. One person complained about a tweet about transgenderism, And suddenly there's a High Court case about it, about whether non-crime incidents should be recorded against you for having a joke on Twitter. So we're pandering to these minority views, even radical feminism. How many are there? Less than 1% of women could give a damn. Really, 2020 honestly could give a damn, but one person does, and that's it. It becomes a problem for everybody else, and then there's this horrible culture war about it. At the end of the day, what did Will Nolan said that changed anything? Nothing.
No, but Rebecca, you make a great point that an establishment like Eton does churn out many, people who will be in positions of influence, be that good or bad. You could argue that, but the fact is that they do. And so young minds should be exposed, surely, to a plurality of views. And that's a healthy thing. So, Bill, isn't it therefore very unhealthy that in this instance, that exposure to other to different opinions is ultimately being, slapped down on, and they're not allowed to even consider matters which I give reference as being matters of kind of the obvious biological truth?
Of course it is. And the reason why this is being done, as with so much of modern education, is to get young people almost brainwashed into believing the things that are completely illogical, completely not proven, but they are the fad of the times. They are the drive of the Marxist educational system and all the rest of the people fighting these culture wars. There's something that you picked up on a little bit earlier on, David, where you were talking about white working class boys and their position in society's pyramid. Well, I can tell you, and there's a couple of comments that are coming through on the screen, but I can tell you where our position as white working class people is. It's right at the bottom until something needs to be done that's difficult, like in my area where I come from, the Black Country, being the people who had a limited lifespan because they were fueling the Industrial Revolution. Or you talk about winning wars on the playing fields of Eton. I don't believe that for a second, because it was white working class men who went out and died in their droves to win these wars. And we're the ones who are vilified and demonized by all this. And all this talk of equality, it's a subterfuge for actually doing down the white working classes. Yeah. And it won't just stop at the white working classes, because there's a lot of people from different ethnic backgrounds who buy into the working class traditional ethos of hard work, patriotism, family, traditional beliefs, and every one of us is being put down at the moment by this new way of thinking, because we are dangerous. Because when the working classes do come together, they create change. And the latest example of that was Brexit. But there are so many other times when we have created change. And the vilification of these people, and I must say, this really does wind me up intensely. And recently, as I've mentioned, I think before in one of the shows, I looked into my heritage, doing some ancestry search. And all I could see was working class men dying by the age of 40, working in foundries, dying before the age of 40, going out and fighting in wars for hundreds of years, living in the same areas, and being the ones who fueled this country to get where it is. And now, in this modern age, we've got middle-class kids being taught by middle-class teachers and educators and media folk that we're the bad guys. Well, frankly, I think this is the equivalent of shooting the golden goose, because we are the ones who've kept this country going for centuries. And if you stamp down too hard on us, we end up being the ones who change the country. And I believe that's what will happen.
Well, it has happened, and it happened with Trump. And this is, the culture war is actually this rise of populism. And by populism, I'm not using the term pejoratively, because populism was a labor socialist movement back in the middle of the 19th century in the US. It was the rise of the working man, and there was a populist party, which was a left-wing party. And what it says is, exactly what Bill has just said. We do all the hard graft. We die early for your cotton fields or whatever it is, your industrial revolution. We've got a voice as well. So that was the rise of populism then. But now, of course, whoa, Brexit. And then we got Trump. Suddenly, populism has got a very nasty connotation because the elites are suddenly under threat because, oh my God, we gave these people a vote and look what they did. They're thick, they're racists, they're knuckle dragging apes, and we let them choose our trading arrangements with the European Union. My goodness me, we're never going to do that again. You know, shuffle in our little middle class ivory towers. It was an absolute outrage that the ill-educated in this country voted for change. I mean, how awful can that be? It was appalling.
Yeah, it's remarkable. It's remarkable snobbery. And could I just say, I only wish the Duke of Wellington was still alive to hear your respective criticisms of his comments. But his words, not mine. However, yeah, there is this this thing, this sort of inverted snobbery thing. But Rebecca, just back to you for a second. Was Eton right to sack Mr. Noland or not?
Now, that the merits of that decision could well go down to whether he's actually in a misconduct trial on his employment contract. There may well be a clause in his contract that says he can't run a social media channel with, you know, banned stuff on it. If it was purely about free speech, absolutely not. Of course, I would say that. But no. You know, and one of the interesting things about what you were talking about, Harriet Harman and the Equality Act, of course, that, as Bill will know, this comes from an EU directive on equality, and it's pretty much word for word the EU directive on the equalities. And so, you know, it was an act of parliament that consolidated previous anti-discrimination laws. In and of itself, it's not that problematic, and changing it in our system does need refinement, but it's case law that defines the way things are decided in this country. So, you know, looking at how employers use the Equality Act as a sword against their employees, or you know, even how university students' unions and Senate committees, how they use their sort of safe spaces, and they're treating each other with respect. So I'm going to come back to that word respect. It's such a critical word. That, you know, students who express a different view perhaps are vilified, sanctioned, you know, removed from universities sometimes. And some of the work in the Free Speech Union, you know, we've been using the Equality Act as a shield. So just hypothetically, if a girl who's Orthodox religious, say comes from, let's say, Poland, and she's very strong RC, she comes to the UK and LGBT is all around her, and she says, oh my goodness me, I thought these people were discriminated against. They're not, they're everywhere. If she says that and then gets disciplined for it, she is being disciplined effectively under the auspices of the Equality Act. But then I've always said, oh, turn it back on them. Say, what about your rights? Because you have a right to expression of your religion. So they have a right to express their sex, and they have a right, you know, not to be made a victim of in the criminal law sense of the word by what you say, but you have a right under the Equality Act as a shield to protect yourself and say, hang on, I've got a protective characteristic. I have a philosophical belief which is well established in Western Europe. So it is a piece of legislation that you can use as a shield and a sword. Unfortunately, more people use it as a sword than as a shield. But we have seen a couple of cases this year, Forstater and the ethical vegan case earlier on in the year, where the court has had to find a definition of what philosophical beliefs are under the Equality Act. So it's not all bad news, definitely, but we need the appeal courts to start making rational sense of this piece of legislation. The harsh reality is most people haven't got the money to run these cases up to the appeal courts. They just have to take the judgment at first instance. So we haven't got a huge amount of case law that helps us define what these different sections of the Act are and how they apply in our jurisdiction. Well, if you live in Europe and you're under a civil law system, good luck, because you're stuffed under the EU directive. At least we have the protection of judges here.
Well, I mean, that's interesting, Bill, insofar as, I mean, perhaps the Equalities Act could be used to be, as Rebecca puts it, a shield rather than a sword. But I see it almost overwhelmingly being used as a sword. And, if someone dares question particularly rad fem ideology, and they have, they risk everything. And that's just so wrong, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, to loosely quote, you may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I'd like to see less laws, less rules, less regulations, less acts of parliament. Frankly, because they can be double-edged swords and they can be used. And as quite rightly been said, it comes down to who's got the most money to get the best lawyer to deal with this. Frankly, none of this should be the remit of the government. There should be a law that, to stop signs up saying, as we used to have in the 60s, where there were the awful racist signs of, no dogs, no blacks and things like that. That kind of thing needs to be clamped down. Everyone can agree with that. But when you're into just the transactions of day-to-day life, if you've got an opinion, if you're a Roman Catholic and you strongly believe against certain things, abortion, for example, and so on, you've got the right to say it. If you're a Muslim and you believe other things, you've got a right to say it. And you shouldn't be clamped down on by any legislation. It should be down to, if you like, the marketplace of public opinion. As with everything, the market is always best because the market is the will of the people in the long run. And let people say what they want to say. And if you say something that's idiotic or offensive or stupid in some respect, you'll get far worse in the long run than being chastised by the government. You get shunned by your peers and thought of as a complete buffoon. And I go back to when Nick Griffin appeared on Question Time. The BNP were on the rise. They were absolutely flying. And then they put this clown on Question Time and shone the light on the fact of what obnoxious people they were, and they died. And that's what it's the best disinfectant is the sunlight. Let people see, let people talk.
I completely agree. In fact, actually, sorry,
is all about employment rights. And, you're right. When you start defining something, you effectively confine it. And I think that there are occasions where the Equality Act, because its remit is so wide, that because it doesn't just apply to the workplace, it applies pretty much broadly. And it almost feels as though its tentacles are in all aspects of our life. That anybody can use it to attack you, and you will founder unable to defend yourself because of that. So it doesn't need saying, really, does it, that it should apply to employment, it should apply to adoption, it should apply to any state function, effectively, hospitals, schools, of course it should apply, but social media, no, of course not. Teaching, no. Education to be open.
Well, I mean, then let's just move it on a little bit into, there was another story I saw, actually, you may not have seen this, but it relates to the mayor of Paris. I don't know if you've seen this story, came about today, who was fined, apparently, for discriminating against men by essentially mostly recruiting women into senior positions in her Paris office. And she just casually dismissed this fine as if it were a minor inconvenience, and ha ha ha, all I was doing was discriminating against men. I mean, as a man, Bill, if that was reversed and you were the mayor of Paris and you were discriminating against women, I would suggest you would not be in office very long.
Well, you'd be dragged off to the guillotine, wouldn't you? It's the one group of people at the moment in society who you can discriminate against is men. And that's the the truth of the matter. And if they're white, that's even worse, because they are the devil. And this is the thing, we talk about equality legislation, equality laws. It's nothing to do with equality, is it? Because if one section of society is demonized on a very regular basis, then it isn't about equality, it's about positive discrimination. And that's what happens all the time. There are so many jobs, for example, that are advertised where it says only people from a certain ethnic minority need apply, or we're looking for an LGBTQ person for this. And if you were to apply with all the best qualifications as a white male, you wouldn't even get a look in. That's the only part of society that could legally be done to, is white men. And that is absolutely outrageous. And that's why we get these poor results for white boys in schools. That's why we get a growing pool of resentment from working class males who feel hard done by. And you know what? It's because they are. It's because they are. And all these examples of the positive discrimination, all they do is divide us. It will not, in the long run, make things better for anyone. It'll make things worse, because you're picking on a group of people who, as I said before, they've been the engine of society. They could well be the destroyers of society if you push them too hard. I think it's not only stupid, but it's dangerous.
I think you mentioned you were quoting from John Lennon earlier, Bill. Imagine, and in a similar vein, I mean, maybe I'm a dreamer and I'm not the only one either. But I believe in a world where people, regardless of gender or sexual preference or all of that, everyone should be allowed to rise as far as their capabilities. Bring them, Rebecca, and that seems to be that's my definition of what a balanced and sane society is. Once you start, though, to try and manipulate around guaranteeing outcomes, you really mess everything up for men and women, don't you? It corrupts the system.
Yes, and if you prescribe something, if you start to define it, you end up in trouble. And actually, this is a really good segue for me to talk about what happened at Cambridge University, because the Vice Chancellor of Cambridge University supported an amendment to their free speech policy. And in that free speech policy, one of the provisions was you have to respect people's characteristics, and thereby the university would uphold that its staff and student body will respect. Now, the problem with respect is it's actually quite a high standard. And if people are going to be analysing your words based on, do you respect their transgenderism, or do you respect their religion or their views on race or whatever?
Yeah.
Well, when it comes to, say, a liberal being asked to respect a far right point of view on something, does that mean they can't push back on it? So these were the hypothetical positions put forward by Professor Arif Ahmed, who's a philosopher at Cambridge, because he said, no, respect isn't going to cut it with us. Respect is too high a standard. And if somebody subjectively decides it's not respectful, then we'll no platform them. And really, in an unprecedented way, last week, he organised a coalition of the student body and the dons at Cambridge, and they slammed down the Cambridge University Council on free speech. So now the word of their statute is tolerate, which means shut up and listen, because you've got to tolerate. So much better than respect. And the reason I say that is because Trendy Hendy, as he's known, the headmaster of Eton, has said, we aim to respect. So he's using the wokey words of respect, which Cambridge dons have just voted down. I mean, it was a 4-1 vote in favour of tolerate for Cambridge University. It is such an outstanding victory from Cambridge University that Professor Stephen Troop people are calling for him to resign because he lost so spectacularly badly. And of course, Toby Young jumped straight in and said, right, let's have a little chat about Jordan Peterson then, shall we? Because, you know, he lost his fellowship. So can we ask you to reinstate him? Because he lost his fellowship over lack of respect for views. David Starkey, his fellowship, he lost that because, well, he lost it because he resigned rather stupidly, I thought, after the Darren Grimes interview. But that was because he didn't respect the feelings of Black people. Well, if the people in Cambridge had to tolerate David Starkey's views, you can see that the balance changes in the argument, because you are saying tolerate is a shield. You have to tolerate me. Somebody can't come up to you and poke you in the face and say, you have to respect me, you're off. Now it's shifted to tolerate. So you don't like what I'm saying, David, you got to tolerate me. Tough. It's so much better. It's brilliant. It's actually genius what they've done.
But I do, Rebecca. I really do. However, it's a really interesting point you make. It's a really interesting distinction. Phil, what's your sort of response to what Rebecca's saying? The difference between, respect and tolerate.
Well, as someone who's been banned from speaking on university campuses across the country and classed as a medium to high risk, they never said what of, but I was just classed as a medium to. I'm a risk of many things, but I find the whole concept of having to work out whether or not they respect or tolerate it. I understand, and I agree with what Rebecca's saying, but quite frankly, we shouldn't even have to think this way. I'll give you a small anecdote. When I was at school, my favourite teacher, I'll give him a name check. His name was Chris Withy. He was a history teacher. He was a rampant Marxist, rampant, and he turned our history classes, in the sixth form particularly, we did a little bit about the facts, but then we discussed the implications, the politics of it, the points of view. And then, as now, I was a rampant Thatcherite. As you know, in the 80s, that was quite a hot topic between us. Chris Withy brought that through, gave me a love of history and learning. And what's more, he helped me develop my ideas, even though we had polar opposite points of view. That to me is proper education. That to me is the way that schools should be. He didn't, he wasn't prejudiced against me because I had a different point of view. He hated my point of view, and he hated the fact I was a UKIP MEP. I spoke to him, he thought I was bonkers, but he still was happy that I'd done well. That should be what it's about. There shouldn't have to be this sort of, I'll tolerate it or respect it. It's just a point of view. We're entitled to it, and we can still be friends as long as we don't set the rules against each other so much that we turn into enemies. And that's the danger. That's where we are in society. Instead of having disagreements, we're becoming enemies. That's wrong.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, although actually, you talk about respecting different opinions. Going back to Trendy Hendy at Eton, I think Eton is mega woke in these things, Rebecca. I think Eton has embraced the BLM. I think it's currently in the process of decolonizing its curriculum, and you just gotta wonder, and I guess this conversation is focusing a lot around academia and education, but that's fair enough, because that is, like Bill has just talked about, how influential and formative that was for him. And it is for many of us, those years at school and maybe if you go to university, those are really important years. And when you have an institution like Eton decolonizing its curriculum, what does that say about the forces that are pressurizing down into academia?
Well, look, I mean, we have been spending, I think, £380,000 over the last few years, putting our civil servants into re-education camps. They have to go on to, sort of what is it called? The unintentional bias, whatever that word is. I can't remember what it is now. To make sure that they're not accidentally prejudicing against people because they're white privileged. I've said for so long to people, one of the big problems in Western society, certainly British society, is that you have your government, right? You have your elected officials, but then you have quangos. Now, quango chiefs don't get chucked out. Think of the Electoral Commission, for example, run by lefties, put in there by Blair and Brown. So they were put in there, age 50 or thereabouts. And they're still there now, and they will be there up until maybe, another 10, 15 years. And this sort of filtering down of these ridiculous liberal views, these sort of left views, it's just so ingrained in there. And, we could elect in Attila the Hun or me, and it wouldn't make a blind bit of difference. I would be as super conservative, I'd be so right wing, nobody would tolerate it, but it wouldn't matter, because all of these institutions are run by people of a completely different viewpoint and complexion. And it's so depressing, that all of our civil servants and politicians do come from Eton. That's depression number one. Depression number two is that they are now being fed this complete and utter nonsense. And they won't need unconscious bias training because, they've been indoctrinated. But I am afraid that it's all very well putting the icing on the cake, but things then go underground and you create more radical positions. Look at BLM. How many more people feel angry about race than this time last year? Many feel angry. Many feel angry about the dialogue over BLM, because we say, hang on a minute, what are you talking about? We're not racist. What are you talking about? What the hell are you talking about?
But that's an interesting point, Bill, that Rebecca makes. But by the imposition, the downwards, the pressure of these radical leftist positions, fundamentally, it does cause the dissent that Rebecca said. I reckon, I don't know what you think, Bill, I think BLM has done more to damage race relations in the UK than anything in recent time. And, I also think when you see the white working class being trampled all over, that has to ultimately cause, real sort of counter reactions as well, wouldn't you say?
BLM has created a massive issue. And as a small example, when I play cricket in the summer, I play in a cricket side where normally I'm the only white man playing. The rest of the side is made up of people of different ethnic minorities, most of them with Pakistani heritage. It's the way it is. We never think about it. It is never even considered. And the only time we had to even discuss the issue of race was when some do-gooder from the cricket committee said, do you think you should take a knee before the first game of the season? To which I was so delighted to the lads in the team said, don't be so ridiculous. We're not going to do that. And what's more, they said, we're not going to put Bill or any of the other white players in a position where they feel different to the rest of us. And that, I thought, that was the real face of British people from different ethnic minorities. They don't want to be separated from us. It's these forces, these politically orientated groups who are trying to prize us apart because then they can pick us off easier. And if they create a situation where white working class people start to kick back, which it could happen, and it is happening to a degree, then you'll see we'll have problems. We'll have race relations issues, the likes of which we haven't had since the 70s. I grew up in the 70s, and I was aware of racism, but then latterly, the 80s and 90s, and I was in inner city Wolverhampton in a school where white people were the minority. There wasn't that kind of issue going on. They're creating these problems on purpose to destabilize society as part of their whole motivation and their whole aims. It's nothing to do with racial fairness and equality. It isn't, and it will create problems. And I must say, that example at the cricket club, I mean, I found it very touching and very moving, actually, because I did say to the guys, look, if you do want to go ahead with it, I'll just pop around the back of the pavilion and have a fag, and you can carry on with it. And they said, no, we don't believe in that kind of nonsense. They don't speak for us. And I think that's important to remember.
But well, radical feminists don't speak for me. I don't put the bins out. Never. That's not a girl's. I don't want equality on some things. I do on the others, but I don't on some. Thank you very much. But one of the best examples, really, of what you're talking about, Bill, is another hot potato, which is transgender. Because when the Gender Recognition Act came in, at the time, it was estimated that there was 350,000 people in the country who would be looking to go for the full gender recognition certificate at some point. So they were in the process of or discussing about. So it was estimated that the problem, if it was a problem, was about 350,000 people. A mere 3,500 people have ever applied for a gender recognition certificate, which really means, shock horror, about 98% of transgender are actually transvestites. It is such a tiny minority of people that go the full hog, but you would think it was one of the biggest problems in 2020, if all.
Oh, you would? Yeah.
But it isn't. Radical feminism isn't. And just about, I was brought up in India, so I was the only white girl at my school for other reasons. I talk about BLM with my friends in India. They go, why are you kneeling down, basically for a criminal who was, a bit arsey with the police? Is it any wonder that he died? Okay, we're not saying the police wasn't wrong, because yes, it was. You shouldn't die in police custody of any sort. But why are you taking the knee at football matches? My Indian friends ask me. It's like, you guys are crazy. So it is a tiny minority that shouts so loud. They're such squeaky wheels that nobody dares confront them. And then if you do, now, as the Miller judgment will tell you, they can record it as a non-crime incident. That would come up on my DBS check if I wanted to work with children. I just said, if anybody, Aussie, don't go reporting me to the police for what I just said. If you say something that even challenges the orthodoxy, you could end up with knock on the door from Plod saying it's a non-crime incident. That's crazy piece of legislation. It's mad.
Yeah, I mean, well, it is actually terrifying, and I mean, you can lose all sorts of things. It is reported that you can lose your Twitter platform if you say the wrong things as well.
Really?
Yeah. So the ability to speak freely when you challenge orthodox views is very difficult. But actually, just Rebecca, I'll come to you in a second, Bill. But I just wanted to say on the football thing, because you brought up sport there, Bill, and obviously I know you're both big football fans, both of you. And Rebecca, you saw the scenes 2 weeks ago, I think it was at Millwall. Don't know who they were playing, but anyway, the fans booed the players who were taking the knee in the center circle, and the fans were not booing the desire to stamp out racism from football. They were booing the sight of players fundamentally taking the knee to a Marxist ideology that they didn't particularly like. And I just wondered what, I mean, does this kind of ideology then cause problems in something like football?
Well, the rule of the FA is that there can be no political signs or slogans. So they're not allowed to wear poppies, even though every colour and everybody suffered really in the world wars. So and every war. I mean, the poppy is remembrance for every war. So they're not allowed that, but they are allowed to take the knee for somebody who died 3,500 miles away. It is crazy. I'm so glad the crowds are back, because we all knew it was going to happen. Everybody knew it was going to happen. And yeah, Bill will agree with me, I'm sure. Back in the old days at Villa Park, there was racism. Poor old Mark Walters, Cyril Regis, all the early guys, they got racist abuse. They did, and it was horrible. But it's gone. It has gone from football. So good for them, and keep trying and show solidarity with anti-racism and anti-everything. That's fine. I don't have any issue with that. But don't take the knee for a criminal who died 3,500 miles away, because I'm not having that. That's political. That's not ideological. That's political.
It is, but in a sense, Bill, the thing is that you've got that sort of you've got football, which has gone through the experience that Rebecca's talked about from maybe the 70s and 80s to a much more recent, enlightened position, pretty much comprehensively, and yet we have this being injected into it. But I would suggest, Bill, that also when it comes to men and women, in terms of employment and all of that, the UK is a pretty enlightened place, and yet you wouldn't think that when you hear the endless whining from the political left about the gender pay gap, blah 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 blah, and it's like a constant chorus of dissent, and yet I think as a country we're doing pretty well.
Yeah, just briefly to follow the football thing up. Last night, Cambridge United had some booing of the kneeling, and they've issued a statement today saying they're going to find out who booed and ban them from the ground. So this is how serious it is. When you back to the workplace issue, I think actually most of the experience that I've had recently back in the workplace, I've found myself having women bosses and managers, women in senior positions around me. I don't see this as if anyone was going to see this, surely I would be one of those who'd see it, because here I am, quite obviously a gammon, as they call it, and all the rest of these sort of very male character, and I would be one of the first to be thriving and say, great, keep the women down. It's nothing like that. I just don't see it. And I used to work in the steel industry, and even 10, 15 years back in the steel industry, very male dominated, you'd have thought, but there were brilliant women coming through and putting us to shame. And the difference between, and this is where we come back to, differences between men and women. We would get some orders in the morning, celebrate at lunchtime, and spend most of the afternoon maybe with a little bit drowsy after having a shandy or two. The ladies were not doing that. They were working the full day and they were overtaking us. And that was a sort of macho culture that we were in. And it was laying us down because we were only doing half a day's work. So let's be sensible and realistic about this. Women can do anything that they put their mind to, within reason, as long as you're not talking about going and lifting heavy weights on a building site all day. Most women, not all, most women would find that perhaps a challenge. But on 99% of the jobs we're talking about, they not only can compete, they do, and they do it better than us. And the best example, and I have to get a name in, one woman who succeeded in a man's world, didn't need quotas, didn't need positive discrimination. Our greatest ever Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, did not require and was totally against all of this women's lib and all positive discrimination. She didn't need it because she was head and shoulders the best. And that she was abused by saying she was more of a man than the men. Rubbish. She was a woman who was a brilliant woman and actually used the fact that she was a woman and had the advantages of the feminine way of thinking and doing things to put the men to shame. And that surely must be the example that we can show to people to say, you don't need all this extra help. You don't need people to be picked out and, the poor little ladies need some help. Rubbish. No, they don't. No, they don't. If they put their mind to it, they can compete with us men and beat us more often than not.
Yeah, but I really interesting point. Now, neither of you could say this, but I'm allowed to, such is the divide here. It's a little known fact that of all medical school entrants, total number, 60% are female. Okay, so if ever there's a triumph of, outcome, it's got to be 60% to 40% for women. However, the problem with it all is not when they're going through university, not when they're doing their house jobs, not when they're doing any of their training posts, all fine. What about when they want to start having babies? Now, this is one of my biggest bugbears in life. Women who choose not to have babies, fine, good. I respect your decision to have your career. I chose to have babies because I wanted babies. And one of the biggest problems with feminists is they don't congratulate women who choose to step aside from a career and bring their own children up. What better job can you do for society as a mother than bring your own children up? And if you can't, don't have them. And if you can't because you don't like them, particularly, you don't want them, or you can't afford to have them, don't have them. Don't expect somebody else to bring your children up. You're the best person to bring your children up. And women, feminists, need to support women like me. And my career would have been a hell of a lot better if I hadn't taken all of those years out to look after my babies. And I'm proud of it. Look at what they've achieved. So we don't value the differences between men and women. And this is where the gender pay gap comes in, because my choice is to work part-time. And I take a hit on earnings. Big deal. Big deal. I don't make it to the boardroom. Who cares? Don't value me on one aspect of my life. Look at me and say, oh, you're a barrister and you've got 2 children and you look after the home nicely and you bring up the children well. So we're not valuing the differences between men and women. Women will never be men, ever. We have a different mindset. We approach problems differently. Men develop at a different rate, emotionally and intellectually. And then in a way, men take over. Men have different spatial awareness, different abilities with maths. Women have soft skills. If you have these people punching you all the time saying equal, 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 they are themselves pushing their own sex down by doing so, and they are diminishing the role of mothers in society. And actually, it's a sad fact that one of the biggest pressures on marriages is working mothers, because the parents struggle to keep a family going when the woman isn't at home looking after the children. It's a statistic which says a lot about why the divorce rate is so high. It's because of working families. And so we need to value people on different metrics rather than whether you reach board level or not. So I don't have much sympathy with the gender pay gap, because it is an intellectually dishonest argument, the gender pay gap.
It is. And Bill, I mean, those are brilliant points, Rebecca. And it's really, as you say, you have permission to be able to make those points in a way. If Bill or I did, we would be, my sexist alert. But the fact is, we should celebrate the differences and the different skills and the different abilities, Bill, that men and women bring to the table. And yet, despite all that, Rebecca, we have, for example, in the FTSE 250, sort of essentially legal requirements being brought in to make sure that the glass ceiling is broken so women can get equal numbers of women round the board table. And Bill, that's just so wrong, isn't it?
Yeah, well, anything that goes against meritocracy is wrong in my view. It should simply be who the best person is for the job. I don't care what colour they are, what gender they are, how they identify. It's irrelevant. You just allow people to pick the best. And again, going back to what I said, that's where you let the market decide. Because if you allow people to be competitive and go for the market, an employer is going to pick the best person. And this argument, they're going to be prejudiced in favour of a white man. Well, actually, if there's a black woman who's 10 times better and is going to yield them £1 million a year more profit, they'll go for that one. They will, otherwise they'll be out of business. And the point that you mentioned just now, David, which was, I think, is the crux to all this, and what I was hoping to get to in this discussion tonight is, why do we have to talk about men and women as being one better than the other, or being equal? The whole point of nature's design, or God's design, dependent on how you want to look at this, is that it's absolutely the most efficient design possible, where you've got people with two different skill sets, two different sets of strengths, and individually they can get by. You put them together in a family unit and they are unbeatable, because they complement the other side of each other. The two become a whole, and that whole is so much better and so much more important. That's why marriage, family, and all these things, they aren't just there because someone thought it was a good idea. They aren't just there because someone woke up one morning and thought it was a good plan. They're there because it's the best way to live, and it's been proved out over centuries, if not millennia. So frankly, this whole point of who's better, who's stronger, nonsense. One side can do one thing better, the other can do the other thing better. Put them together, you're on a winner.
Isn't it strange, though, that we should actually celebrate our very diversity, rather than try and, Rebecca, mold us all into sort of one big homogenous mess, which actually in itself contradicts the reality. As you say, as a woman, you have different sets of skills and abilities to Bill and myself, and that, as Bill said, that's the great gift that we have, that we're not the same and that we are diverse. And yet the rad femme ideologists and other elements of leftism, they seek to pretend that doesn't exist, and it's just fundamentally denying reality, isn't it? Because that's what it comes down to.
It's a lot of things, actually, because they want to be more equal than men. They don't want equality. They want more equality. I find affirmative action deeply patronizing and offensive in the extreme. And in many ways, being a barrister is a meritocracy, because if you screw up, the judge is going to jump on you. Doesn't matter what you are. Even if you're a cocker spaniel, you're going to get in trouble if you get it wrong. So, in fact, the bar is brilliant. It is predominantly a man's world. But have I ever experienced sexism at the bar? Never, ever, ever. So, yes, of course we're different. But you know what? I deliberately brought up that stuff about the medical students, because we will have a crisis if we don't address the simple fact that the ethnic majority male gender in this country is white boys. If we don't get white boys to think they can be doctors, we have a big problem. Not because Asian boys are taking over, because they are. The males that are medical students are predominantly Asian because of their work ethic being so different to white work ethic. But we're storing up a human resources problem, because you can't have all these females being part-time consultants, because, like it or not, radical feminists, if you're a surgeon, you need to be on the operating floor all day, every day. It's not a part-time job, love. It's a full-time job. So we've got to have more boys going to university. We've got to have more white boys thinking they can be doctors. So how are you going to do that unless you have affirmative action towards boys? It's got so bad against white working class boys now that we do need affirmative action. We do need to talk out about it. And actually, people like me who are women, to go and say to radical feminists, prove your point. Where's your evidence? Because I'll give you evidence that shows that white working class boys now do need help. We've got a big problem with them, a really big problem.
It is. And Bill, I'll give you the final word on the stream tonight. I mean, I'm sure you'd agree that what Rebecca said, it is critical that you summed it up very well earlier, Bill. The white working class males built huge chunks of this country, and that resource is still there. It's just totally undervalued and underdeployed, as Rebecca says. So we do need to fix that, don't we?
Yeah, but I think the way we can fix it is perhaps even simpler than what Rebecca was putting forward. And it's to remove all affirmative action, to remove all equality legislation and to work towards a meritocracy. And you will find that white working class boys will then do as well as they can or as poorly as they can. And it won't matter because they won't have the feeling they're being held down. They won't look at their contemporaries and thinking, well, they're getting a leg up and we're not. They'll think, survive, sink or swim on your own benefits, on your own merits. And that's how it should be. At the moment, the reason why they are the low point they're at is because they are being deliberately held back whilst others are being given a hand up. That's wrong. Give us all an equal break, all an equal chance. You won't get an equality of outcome. You won't be able to dictate or decide what percentage of who gets what. But you know what? It actually will be fair because the best people will do the best as long as they work the hardest. And surely that's what life should be about, not about the colour of your skin or about your gender.
Well, on that positive, life-affirming note, Bill, we will bring proceedings to an end, but can I thank you very much, Rebecca? Thanks to you as always. And to all of those who watch this, do make sure you hit the subscribe button, make sure you follow us, make sure you share this, and we will be back for our pre-Christmas show next week, which I believe is going to be something else. So brace yourselves for what lies in store next week. Spoiler alert. In the meantime, bye from me and Bill and Rebecca. Bye, everyone.